But first, let's talk about the Spanish-American War as orchestrated, as I understand it, in reading your book, under some false pretenses. What can you tell us about that?
I could tell you enough to take up the whole show. Never mind those other wars and other topics. But the Spanish-American War, I consider it significant, Jay, because it was the first war in which Americans were persuaded that the purpose of our military was not national self-defense. This war was fought over Spain's colony, Cuba, and it was the first war where we were persuaded that the duty of our military was to go overseas and right wrongs for other people. That was a very significant. I think that one reason why this war, this battleground was chosen, they wanted to have a very winnable war that would convince people that these types of wars would be easily fought. And so the Spanish-American War, of course, we completely overwhelmed Spain in terms of our military capacity. And we're fighting in Cuba, which was less than 100 miles from our shore and more than 4,000 miles from Spain. The Spanish knew they couldn't win this war. They did everything they could to prevent it. But we were brought into the war partly through a skill that has been honed over time, and that is mass media propaganda lies. I mean, modern people in the truth movement are aware of some of these lies, such as the famous baby incubator story that helped sway public opinion to support the 1991 Gulf War. Well, they were doing this back during the Spanish-American War through what was called the Yellow Press, William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer, the New York Journal, the New York World. And they were putting these fake atrocity stories, and they were saying that the Spaniards, bear in mind, Cuba was a very wealthy colony of Spain. The banksters here in America wanted that colony and its sugar industry, which had become the most lucrative in the world by the 19th century. And so it was necessary to persuade Americans that the Spaniards were doing these dastardly things to the Cubans. So we were told that they were roasting priests. And I'll read you a headline from William Randolph Hearst, New York Journal, October the 6th, 1896, quote, "Cubans fed to sharks, cries heard at night. They're taken outside the harbor, and the silent ferryman comes back alone," unquote. Or how about this one? Quote, "Raided a hospital, more than 40 sick and wounded Cubans butchered," unquote. But, there was no hospital in the place where the newspaper was describing. Hearst made up a lot of these stories sitting in New York, and his own reporters in Cuba never went outside the bars of Havana. So this was something that would be seen again and again, inventing atrocity stories, actually to take advantage of the native goodness of Americans, making them think that you've got to go fight these evil people overseas. And by the way, Jay, let me say that atrocities do take place, but usually the real ones you don't hear about. The ones that get us going to war usually are not ones that are real.
Mm-hmm. So there's pretty good evidence, and in fact, that these were nothing but fabricated stories or lies. And I find it striking that you said Pulitzer was involved as well?
Yeah, he and Hearst were their newspapers were leading the charge for this war. And of course, the main trigger point, I talk in this chapter about false flags. The main false flag was the sinking of the Maine, no pun intended. We sent a battleship down there on a so-called friendly visit that served no purpose to have a battleship there. We had no vital interest in Cuba. It was not our property. And 2 days after William Randolph Hearst printed a headline that said the worst insult to the United States in its history, he had a letter from the Spanish ambassador to America stolen, and it was critical of McKinley. He had it printed in his newspaper under that headline, "Worst Insult to America in Its History." 2 days later, the Maine blew up, and 266 Americans were dead. And of course, you know that the battle cry of the war was "Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain." There is not the slightest evidence whatsoever that the Maine was sunk by the Spanish. They had they had demonstrated every willingness to cooperate with us. They bent over backwards to avoid this war. The commander of their Atlantic Squadron, Admiral Severa, said they had no hopes of winning a war against. They had wooden warships. We had steel warships. And this difference of firepower was borne out in the actual naval engagements, the Battle of Manila and the Battle of Santiago. Not only did we wipe out their fleets, we did not only have no ships lost, we only had one fatality in either of those engagements. One of those fatalities was from a heart attack. the Spanish would not have tried to provoke us by sinking the Maine. But you'll see this pattern of false flag events. Of course, the next one was the Lusitania. But
right, exactly. Yeah. Well, I just find it interesting that we have the Pulitzer Prize, which is supposed to be, the major prize in journalism, right? It's supposed to be given to honest, to people who provide honest insights in the media and help people understand some very important stories that are going on. Sort of ironic.
Well, let's not forget that Walter Duranty was given the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the Soviet Union when he denied that there was any starvation taking place at the very time of the Holodomor. That was when 6 million Ukrainians starved to death under Stalin from food confiscation by his communist brigade. So let's not attach too much significance to the Pulitzer Prize.
No, I guess not. But do you have a sense then? I mean, Hearst was a very wealthy man. Was there some more money behind this besides the journalist or besides Hearst himself?
Oh, absolutely. It was this was National City Bank's war. I'm going to give you a quote. This is from Ferdinand Lundberg, and you're probably familiar with him. He wrote a book called America's 60 Families. He used to write for the Wall Street Journal, and he did the behind the scenes reporting of his day, and he said this: the National City Bank during McKinley's incumbency was significantly more closely involved in administration affairs than any other bank. Unquote. Just to flesh that in, National City Bank was the biggest bank in America. It was the predecessor of today's Citibank, and on its board had representatives of J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and the Rothschilds. And President McKinley had gone bankrupt when he was governor of Ohio. He was bailed out by a Rockefeller syndicate led by Mark Hanna, who was an old classmate of John D. Rockefeller's. And then Mark Hanna then became the political boss of the White House. The president used to be satirically called McHanna. And so he was controlled by National City Bank. National City Bank loaned us the money to fight the Spanish-American War, $200 million. Remember, there was no Fed yet. But interestingly enough, not only did National City Bank get control of Cuba's sugar industry after they loaned us the money to fight that war, but the guy who negotiated that $200 million loan, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, was Frank Vanderlip. When the war was over, National City Bank rewarded him by making him the president of National City Bank, and I'm sure you're familiar with this famous memoir when he talks about his trip to Jekyll Island to attend the secret founding of the Federal Reserve.
Exactly. He was one of the principals in doing that, and we're certainly going to talk about that, I'm sure, some more over the next number of months.